Hi guys, sorry about that. I've just had the worst luck over the course of this week with the internet, and it's strange because it seems that it only affects this early morning hour between like 9 and 10. I haven't had the same kind of issues in my later classes, so I think that it's just people getting up, all going onto the internet, overloading the system or whatever because of their morning Zoom meetings and stuff. But not to worry, we are back. I do have a hotspot. We're going to be fully connected throughout the remainder of the lecture, and I'm sorry for the little temporary outage. This is not going to become a constant theme, but we've had a little bit of issues over the course of this week, and so not to worry, guys. Thanks for coming back. When I see that we have about 20, then I'll just resume with my notes for you guys. So thanks so much for being back. I'm glad that at least if this had to happen this week a couple of times, it gives us the chance to build a little experience with how to rejoin a stream, and therefore we'll be good to go. Hi, Vance, Alex, I should say. How are you? I'm back. Just waiting for a few of the other students to return. Good morning. Thanks again, Nicole. On another window really quick, and I'm just going to try to quickly send a message to the class members, notifying them that we can all return. Thanks again, guys, and sorry for the little momentary outage. You know, these are things that are bound to happen, and like I was saying, we're just going to do our best. But it won't become a constant theme. In the worst case scenario, I'll just use mobile data throughout the whole meeting, and that'll at least make sure that we never get cut out. It's not ideal because in a way it can compromise slightly the quality of the bandwidth, but it's better than having to worry about something cutting out. So if there's any kind of blur on the screen, then I'll type notes into the chat for today. At the same time, though, I don't actually have a lot of written notes designed for this lecture because it's much more of like a narrative kind of storybook theme that drives the essay, and that's something that's easier to just talk through. So hold on while I quickly send off a message to some other members of the class. I do see that most of us are back. Got 19 of us at this point, so that's good to know. 1 second. Okay, so again, thanks again. Are we good to go? Alex, you say it stopped for you, but it's working for me, and because I have the same stream shown on my phone through a different account, and it looks like the other students are having no problems for now. So, okay, great, Alex. I'm glad to hear that. Connection issues can happen on my end or your end. In my case this week, I'm sorry that I've had a couple of issues on my side from just the internet. But anyways, welcome back. So the hiddenness of God, guys, I was telling you, I was just briefing you on the big picture of the paper. So let me just kind of give you a quick set of notes on this. It starts off with this hypothetical scenario of a group of people that live on an island. So basically the situation we're supposed to imagine is there's this island. It appears to be isolated from outside contact. Nobody on the island has ever remembered anyone coming to the island from somewhere else. And also, nobody on the island has ever ventured off. So as far as the people that live there know, this is perhaps the whole human civilization. They don't know and they don't necessarily believe that there's another group of humans somewhere else in the world, right? So it's like an isolated, self-contained island civilization of people. But there are these rumors and myths that have come down from some of the elders in the same community. And these elders have said that a long time ago, the island used to be part of a much bigger empire, and it was ruled by this great and good emperor. So that's the myth, that's the legend. It's kind of somewhat half believed by the population there. Younger people don't know whether these are just superstitions or whether there's actual some truth to them. But that's the case. So just for anybody who's just arrived, I'm summarizing the little narrative that is given to advance the argument. There's an island believed to be isolated from all outside contact. Maybe it's all of humanity as far as they know, but there are some legends that say it used to be part of a bigger empire, like one island in a constellation of islands that were formed an empire, and that it was ruled by this big, great emperor. Okay, so one day, though, on the island, something very notable happens. ships start rolling in from the ocean. And so people that are on the island gather on the beach because they're certainly surprised. In their memory, nobody's ever come from outside of the island to visit, so this is a shock. You got a group of people then massing on the beach waiting for the arriving ships. So down comes a ship. From the ship down walk some people, and they say this to the crowd that's gathered. Hey everybody, and we're glad that there's a crowd here because we've come to give you a message. And the reason that we're here today is because we know that you've heard a few rumors that say that this used to be part of a big empire. And we're here to tell you that that's true. This is, in fact, a part of a larger empire, and you guys have just become disconnected from the broader empire. And so we're here to tell you guys that. And also, we've heard that you have had legends spoken to you of some kind of great emperor that ruled the whole empire, yeah? Well, we're also here to tell you that that's true. In fact, he sent us. We're messengers from the emperor, and he wants to basically reclaim this land that you're on as part of the empire because it's sort of become detached from the other parts of it, and he wants you guys to recognize him as your emperor, and he wants you to sort of bow down and give allegiance to him to show that you are his followers because he's your emperor. So that's the reason we're here. What will it be? Will you submit loyalty and devotion to the emperor? But there's one more little plot twist, okay? They then say to the group, the thing is, though, this is not just any ordinary emperor. We call him the hidden emperor. Now, anybody here in the chat, if you could guess, what would you say is their reason for calling him the hidden emperor? Anybody have a thought about this? So you follow the little storybook narrative, and maybe if you're good at anticipating the next plot point, yes, they've never seen him. That's right, Ellie. And they say that. They say we basic simple reason. That's because he never shows himself to anybody. He won't reveal. So he doesn't let himself be made visible in any of the five senses. But we all believe he exists, and we think he's just got these amazing powers. He can become invisible, obviously. He can read people's minds. He can be in more than one place at once. Issues, but wait, is there a problem with the chat, guys? Just gonna test. We're good to go? I feel like we're okay. I could type in the chat, and on my own monitor, I'm seeing the video play. Anybody can confirm that we're all right? Let me know if that's the case. It might have lagged a little bit. If it's laggy, then tell me if there's any information that got left out, or are we all good? So what I was saying to you guys, and I think that you followed me through your commentary, is that they've never seen this emperor, right? So they've never seen him, and that's why they call him the hidden emperor. This, of course, produces a little bit of confusion in the crowd. So the crowd starts to buzz as they discuss what this new information is. So one guy steps forward from the crowd, all right? And this is like an attempt for me to draw the character. And I know the screen's a little blurry, so I'm making it very big and silly looking. He's described as a bearded man, so there he is, okay? I don't know why they call him a bearded guy. Maybe they are trying to impress upon you that like a skeptical type of person is likely to have a beard, but whatever. He comes forward and he says these things to the crowd. He says, all right, everybody, you heard what these people have said, that there's a hidden emperor. And I just don't know if I can believe this. He says, it doesn't make sense to me. If there really was this emperor, then why would he be hidden? Wouldn't it be more normal and reasonable for him to just reveal himself? And then we would all just know that he exists and we wouldn't have to guess. Instead, you're saying that this guy does exist and he wants us to believe in him, but he's not going to do anything to try and prove the case. So, yeah, the board is not easy to see, Stephen. Sam, rather. The board's not too easy to see right now, but I'm not creating detailed notes. I'm just talking you through this essay because there's not a lot of definitions and stuff that you would need to know. You just kind of have to follow the narrative. What is this thing on the board? This is just a crude stick figure drawing of a man that has a beard, just to give you a little bit of a visual aid as I present the description of the story. Okay, but like, if you're following me, this bearded guy steps forward and he has doubts. he has doubts about what has been said. He says, I'm not convinced that there is any such hidden emperor, because if he really did exist and he wants us to believe in him, wouldn't he just reveal himself? So I think that these missionaries are either deceived or just confused, because I just don't believe in such a thing as the hidden emperor. Okay, now after he speaks, another person steps forward and talks, and this other person is just described as like a woman. So I know you guys are telling me how blurry the board is. Picture that this is a stick figure of a woman, okay? That's all I need you to know. So she steps forward and she has the opposite perspective. She says, well, I think that there could be a reason that he wants to remain hidden. Maybe he wants to do this because it gives us a choice whether to believe in him or not. And in case he's just out in the open and easy for us to see, then everybody would believe in him automatically, and nobody would have to make a decision whether to take like a little leap of faith and to go against the unavailable evidence and believe in him anyway. Maybe that's important to him. He wants to give us a sort of test of our devotion and faith. And it also might establish a kind of subordinate relationship where he's higher above us, because if he's invisible and hidden and we're not, then that kind of enhances his majesty and his mystery. So I think there could be a reason that he wants to stay hidden. That's what she says. After she speaks, a guy in the middle comes forward, and this guy's sort of like the moderate in the middle that splits the difference, okay? So he says, look, you guys, you both made some decent points. Well, on your behalf, speaking to the woman that's more of a believer, he says, the other guy says there's no evidence that this emperor exists. That's not really quite true, though. That's not 100% accurate, because although there's not the obvious evidence of your sight and sound, like your five senses, there's some evidence just because of the fact that these missionaries are even here telling us that he exists. So their testimony provides some reason to think that he's real. Also, the half-remembered legends of our elders give another source of evidence. So there's no like direct perceptible evidence, but there's some testimonial evidence, and that's not nothing. But on your behalf, he says, now speaking to the skeptical guy, you did have a reasonable point, though, when you said that it's a bit strange for the emperor to choose to remain hidden if he exists. I think you made a good point when you said that if he really wants us to believe in him, wouldn't the most obvious thing then just be to reveal himself so that that would be easy for us to do? So in the end, he says, here's my kind of middle ground position. The hiddenness of the emperor could mean two things. It could mean that he doesn't actually exist, and that would explain why he seems to be hidden. Or it could be that he does exist, but since he doesn't reveal himself and stays hidden on purpose, then maybe he doesn't actually care whether we are believers in him or not. Because it's sort of like if he wanted us to believe in him, and if that mattered so much, then he would just reveal himself and it would just be a done deal. So the guy in the middle says, maybe the hiddenness means that even if the emperor exists, he doesn't care whether we believe. Now, obviously, these three people here are just stand-ins for the real topic that we want to discuss here. And that topic is, what position should you take about God's existence given that he is hidden? Okay, so the emperor is obviously just like a metaphor for the concept of God, this majestic being that asks of you to give loyalty and devotion, but for whom you can't easily determine that he exists because he's hidden. So the bearded guy represents like a skeptic, a person that's basically more like an atheist, a non-believer. The fact that God or whoever is hidden makes this person think maybe there's no such thing. On the other opposite extreme, the woman represents like the believer, the person who says God is mysterious, and though he's hidden, there's a valid reason for that. Maybe he wants us to decide what to believe. And this guy in the middle, according to McKim, he labels him the tentative believer. So that's the moderate intermediate position. This person says, well, the hiddenness of God is strange. It either means he doesn't exist or maybe he does. But if he does, I'm thinking that maybe he doesn't care whether we believe in him or not. Because again, if he did, he'd reveal himself. So in the end, Robert McKim, the author, he sides with the position of the so-called tentative believer. He thinks that the hiddenness of God is best explained in this way, that he might not even care whether we believe in him if he exists. Now, for you guys, I want you to know how that could be seen as a possible objection to the Pascal's wager. Pascal says that you should choose to believe in God because there's this fear of being wrong if you don't believe. And there's this hope of being right if you do. Essentially, Pascal says that God rewards those who believe and punishes those or fails to reward those who don't believe. But ask yourself, would he reward and punish based on your belief status if he didn't even care whether you believed in the first place? And obviously, no. So only on the assumption that God cares whether you believe in him or not would we hold the implication that you ought to believe as a way of not incurring his wrath, not making him unfavorable to you. But if we eliminated the assumption that what your belief in God is would determine how he dispenses with your soul in the afterlife, then the wager would no longer have any force. Okay? So that's really his overall position on this. And he kind of closes the paper with a discussion of what are some different disadvantages of God being hidden. He lists, I think, 6 what he calls disadvantages of God's hiddenness. So I'm going to put this in the chat so that it's easy to read. Give me 2 seconds to write that. Okay, so what it says is disadvantages of God's hiddenness, and I'm just going to label them and number them right there. So number 1, and then I'll discuss after we get it in the chat. Okay, so the first one, and by the way, let me just check in with everybody here at the meeting. Can you see that clearly in the chat? And are you able to follow my voice for now? Just let me know. Just want to stay in good touch with you guys through today's meeting. Okay, perfect. Thanks, Stephen. Let me know at any time if there's anything that I need to repeat or something that got a little cut. But that's good. Thank you. So first of all, one of the disadvantages of God being hidden is that he's saying it makes it harder for everybody to just believe in God. So what is one of the main barriers to people just all being on the same page, that they all believe in God? Most do believe in God. But for those that don't, probably the number one thing that leads to the disbelief is this factor of God being hidden. You know, I think it's a bad and false stereotype when people think that, like, if someone doesn't believe in God, they're just this hateful, irreligious, spiteful person that just defies divine authority or something, like this is a deviant or something. Really, it's usually just because a person is committed to only believing what they think they can prove or what they have evidence for, and they just think the evidence isn't clear enough for them to have this belief. So if God does exist and he chooses to stay hidden, isn't that making it harder for everybody to believe in God? So in other words, if he was not hidden, this disadvantage wouldn't exist. If he wasn't hidden, then everybody would know he exists, and it'd be so easy and obvious for us to all believe in him. Nobody would choose to defy God if his existence was unquestionable. So that's one of the disadvantages. To the extent that he's hidden, that makes it harder for people to believe. A second disadvantage that he talks about is this. Makes it harder for people to have a close personal relationship with God. Okay, so I'm just putting those notes in the chat there. Makes it harder for people to have a close personal relationship with God. So another thing that's emphasized in the major world religions, especially Christianity, is that you're not merely supposed to believe in God. Of course, that's basic and that's a minimum thing. But on top of that, you're also supposed to kind of foster and maintain a close personal relationship with God throughout your life. But ask yourself, what kind of things does a close personal relationship involve? It involves things like trust, communication, the sharing of hopes, fears, vulnerabilities, secrets. And so to some, it might be harder for them to enter into this type of very confessional, devotional type of relationship, intimacy and so on, with a being that they're not sure whether exists or not. So if God wasn't hidden and his existence was just as obvious as mine or yours, then the argument is that people would not have any hesitancy or difficulty in forming this kind of close personal relationship. Everyone would want to have God as, you know, their close friend who they communicate with and share their thoughts with. So if God's hidden, it makes it harder for some people to take that step since they can't overcome their doubts. So that's another disadvantage of God being hidden. A third one is they're all kind of related, but this one is that it makes it harder for people to devote themselves to and to worship God. Okay, you see there, number 3. Makes it harder for people to devote themselves to and to worship God. So God, we are told we are supposed to believe in him, to have a close relationship with him, but not just believe he exists. Like, I mean, you believe that, like, I don't know, Mount Everest exists, but you don't worship it or praise it. But that's the additional thing about God. You're supposed to worship and praise God. You're supposed to sing his praises, spread his word, prostrate yourself at the feet of God, submit to his will. So you're supposed to humble yourself before the majesty of God and worship him and submit yourself to him. But if that's the case, well, that's harder for some people, again, if he's hidden. You know, some people would have a hard time overcoming their pride or sense of doubt to enter into this deeply submissive and devoted stance towards a superior being. So if God's not hidden, that'd be easy for people to do. In fact, I think people would rush to be the most devout and the most allegiant to God if they knew for a fact that he did exist. So that's another disadvantage mentioned by the author. Then there's just 2 more, I think. He talks next about how creates social conflict and disagreement. Okay, so this point is about how differences of religion and religious interpretation can and have led to social conflict in the world on a small and on a large scale. So how many times have there been, like, religious wars or even interdenominational conflicts that have led to bloody divisions and in some cases breakup of friendships or families? So, I mean, people don't always agree about religion, which religion to practice, or even if they agree on the generalities of which religion, the specifics of how to practice or what denomination to follow. Why is it that there's all this conflict and disagreement? Well, it's because if God is hidden, he can't simply dispel all the controversies and say, well, here was the correct interpretation of my word and my will for what I want mankind to do. If God wasn't hidden, he could basically put us all on the same page so that we would no longer have to divide among ourselves over which religion or in what manner to practice it. So there again, he thinks, is a basic disadvantage. If God was not hidden, none of these disadvantages would be there. We would all be in alignment. We would all worship God, have a close relationship with him, and believe in him. And then finally, one more disadvantage he mentioned was that it allows con artists and frauds to operate. Okay. So this last point is this. Some people, you know, have perhaps used the idea of religion or the divine to promote their own self-interests and not necessarily to advance any kind of real religious message or the glory of God. So, like, think of people who've led cults or who have tried to make profit through some appeal to a person's religious sensibilities. Even going back into the history of the church, there used to be this historical practice called the sale of indulgences, where wealthy people were told that if you give a certain amount of money to the church, then you can win the favor of God when it comes time for Judgment Day. And of course, the practice was later repudiated and rejected by the church too. But this is a problem. Some people would say there shouldn't be these con artists and frauds. Now, how is it that they operate with impunity? Well, because God being hidden, he can't, let's say, expose them for what they are and say, these people are not actually, advancing my message to the world. And they're just using the concept of religion to win their own self-interest. So if God wasn't hidden, then these people would not be able to act with impunity. And all the other disadvantages listed there, 1 through 5, would also not exist. So this kind of, leads him to just restate his main point, which is that if God is hidden and he does exist, and he's letting us deal with all these disadvantages and so on, then maybe it's not as important to him as people say it is, whether we believe in him or not. Because if it did matter to him whether we believed in him, and he didn't want us to have to deal with all these less than ideal disadvantages, then the easiest thing would be to reveal himself, so he must not care really whether we believe in him or not. And returning back to the big picture of Pascal's wager, that could certainly function as an objection to him, because he said that, you know, God does care whether you believe in him, and that's the only basis for assessing the stakes that he does in the wager itself. Okay, guys, so that's everything then from the Robert McKim article. And there's just one more then piece to go into, and that's the last piece for philosophy of religion anyway in our class. So I'm putting the name of the author here, Nicholas Everett. In 2004, he wrote this paper called Theism and Modern Science. So this is a relatively current day philosopher, a younger, like a British philosopher still living. And in 2004, this is the paper that we're going to look at, Theism and Modern Science. Probably heard that there seems to be, at least in some people's mind, like a conflict between what religion says and what modern day science says. A lot of us have heard the general description that if you're really, really heavy into like a science worldview, then that eliminates room for certain religious claims. Or that if you're really devoutly religious, then that means you're not going to adhere to certain scientific theories or beliefs. Some people think that the two things can be brought together and that they're not really in conflict, that maybe there's compatibility between the two realms. But this author, Nicholas Everett, does think that there are strong conflicts, tensions, contradictions between what we hear from religion and what we learn in science. So his goal in the paper is just to kind of reveal to the reader what are the major basic tensions that exist between religious belief and the scientific worldview. Okay, now to get his argument off the ground, he gives us this kind of formal argument to consider at the beginning. So I'm going to write it in the chat. It's got two premises, which lead to the conclusion below. So I'm going to number the premises with these numbers, number 1 and 2. Number 1 premise says this. Okay. Just had to get it typed in. It says, so first premise, if there is a being with nature N and intention I, then it will produce change C in the world. That's not a typo, these letters N-I-C. Let me just give a quick explanation. All it's saying is that suppose that some being exists. You have some kind of hypothesis that a certain type of thing exists. Well, if there were such a being, and you knew, for example, what it was like, that's the nature that it might have. So N is just given as a placeholder for whatever the given nature might be. And suppose you have a sense of what its intentions or goals might be. That's what the letter I is there to stand for. So given the idea that some being with a given nature and intention exists, that would give us the ability to predict what kind of behaviors that it would do in the world. And that's what change C stands for. So change C is just a placeholder for whatever given actions that you would expect this being to do. So to simplify his jargon just a bit, all the premise is saying is that if you thought some type of being existed, then you would kind of have a sense of what it would do in the world. That's all. Okay, now the second premise from there says this. But the world does not display those changes, C. And so therefore the conclusion, and I'm just going to write C for conclusion, or I'll just write the full word because we're already using the letter C and I don't want that to be confusing. So conclusion, there is evidence that the being does not exist. Have you guys ever heard of any films or novels that carry that type of plot line? I have, for sure. Has anyone ever heard of, let's say, Castaway with Tom Hanks? If you have, I'm just asking you to form that kind of scenario in your mind where like a person traveling in some way ends up cast away on a deserted island. Yeah, it's a good movie. It's the one where he's got his friend Wilson, the volleyball. Yeah, so just imagine that type of situation. A person was traveling by air or by boat, whatever, and an accident happens to the vessel. They end up floating somehow uh, toward the shore of a deserted island. Now the person is there, finds himself alone, and wonders this question: could there be any other person like me who has also survived and found their way to the island? Like, I know I somehow grabbed a piece of plywood and floated towards the shore. Maybe somebody else from the same boat or airplane or whatever also was able to find their way here too. He wants to know if there's another survivor, because if so, they could help each other and they could cooperate to try and eventually get off of the island. So he thinks this thought. And now look at premise 1 in the chat. If there is another survivor on this island who's a person like me and who intends to be discovered, then they would do certain things on the island. Okay, so like plugging that into premise 1, we're just saying that in this case, if you speculate that there's another survivor, then you could predict that there's certain type of behaviors they would do. What do you guys think those things might be? I'm asking you basically, like, what kind of things would you be looking for on the island as signs of evidence that there is this other survivor? Like, so before you even get up and go out and conduct a search, in your mind you're thinking, well, I'm going to go out and I'm going to look for these kind of signs. So what kind of signs might those be? Fires, good, Ryan. Generically, like, you know, maybe tools that the person has tried to build to hunt with, maybe a little enclosure where they would like to sleep, smoke signals, maybe footprints, making noises, okay? Signs of life, signs of another survivor. So suppose that this shipwrecked individual then goes out and seeks for these signs all through the island, looking high and low, leaving no stone unturned, as they say, okay? Well, if he conducts that search and doesn't see any of those signs at all, no footprints, no fire pit, no tools, no SOS in the sand, nothing, no man-made shelter, right? If he looks for all that stuff that he was assuming you would find if there was a survivor, and he does not find any of the signs, then what conclusion can he reach? Well, having conducted the thorough search, not seeing the signs, as you know, he would then just have this evidence that there is no other survivor and that that thing doesn't exist on the island. Okay, so basically that's the format of the argument. If you think something exists and you know what kind of behavior it would do, go out and look for it. But if you don't see the signs that you would have expected, now you have evidence that the thing doesn't exist. Okay, so the larger question, of course, is what about God and what science shows us about the universe? And that's where this author thinks that the kind of universe we would have expected if this was created by God is not the kind of universe that science shows us that we have. So the description of the behavior you would expect of this survivor on the island is what he calls apt behavior. So change C is like whatever the appropriate behavior would have been if that being existed. So he thinks if God created the universe for the sake of mankind, and that was his intention, so if there is an all-powerful being who intends to create the universe just for the sake of man to live in it, then we would expect the universe to be a certain type of way. There would be these apt features that it would exhibit if that's how it was created. Now, the point that he's making here is that God was said in the scriptures not to have created the universe for a random reason, like just because he was bored or something, but he did it because he wanted to have a place for the children of God that have been created in his image to live. So human beings, us, we're supposed to be the crown jewel of creation. We're not supposed to be just a random thing that's just there on the side, but we're supposed to be the whole point for which the universe was created by God. And so if God did create the universe for the sake of man, then here's what he thinks the universe ought to be like. And I'm putting this under the chat as apt universe. Okay, so what would it be? Number one, mankind would appear early in the universe. Sorry for the little typo, but I'm sure you can read that. Mankind would appear early in the universe, okay? So if God created the universe for man, then don't you think he would have wanted us to be there at the beginning? What would be the point of God creating the universe for the sake of humans and then just leaving it empty of humans for billions and billions of years until very, very late in the universe's history? You'd expect that he would have wanted us to be there in the beginning, because if the point of the whole system is for us to exist in it, then why would he delayed our arrival by so much time? And of course, in the Genesis stories of the Bible, it is understood that it wouldn't make sense for the creation story to say that God created man way later. So it does say that everything was created within 7 days, and on the seventh day, God rested. So you'd expect that, of course. If God creates the universe for us, then of course we should have appeared very much at the early part. A second thing he says is this: if God created the universe for man, then also mankind would appear not long after the other animals. Okay, so if God creates the universe for the sake of man, then why would he have put all these other animals in it first and left man out until the tail end? You'd think that maybe he would have put the other animals there first just because we would have had to have something to eat and to use for clothing and stuff. But why would he have had them there for so much long in advance? And in the stories of Genesis, again, it says that these things were pretty close in time. You know, everything happened within 7 days, so there wasn't a big gap in time, according to the traditional religious claim. But that's what you'd expect. If God creates the universe for man, then why wouldn't we be there in a short time after the other animals? And the third point is this: the earth would be the center of the universe. Okay, so if God creates the planet Earth with humans on it, and the whole universe is supposed to revolve around us, then you'd expect we would have a central position, that we should be in a prominent place. If mankind and the Earth is the centerpiece of all of the creation, then shouldn't we have everything revolving around us? And therefore, we would hold this kind of unique and central position. Yeah, you would have thought that. And in fact, this was a very deeply committed view of the early generations of the church. If you go to the late Renaissance, the early modern period, people like Galileo and Copernicus, who were starting to discover that we rotate around the sun and we're not even in the center of our local solar system, they were using newly invented telescopes to just observe the orbits of the celestial bodies, and they could prove this, but it was considered extremely heretical and unorthodox. Galileo, for example, was threatened with death if he didn't recant his testimony in public. Now, of course, in the centuries after that, the church has formally apologized to Galileo and his descendants, because nowadays it's just recognized as a scientific fact that we've proven that we are not at the center even of this local solar system. But anyway, that was very important to the church, because they would have thought it was strange for God to have created a universe for man where we're not even in the middle of it all. And then finally, the fourth point he mentions is that the universe would not be vastly larger than the earth. So here again, if God created the universe for the sake of man and man alone, then why should there be all of this additional space out there that none of us can explore or ever do anything with? Wouldn't it just be a bunch of void, unnecessary space in case the universe is just made for man? So look, he says, this is what you'd expect the universe to be like if, in fact, it was the creation of a God making it for the sake of our humankind alone. But then he says, if you actually look at the current day scientific consensus on all these questions, it appears that the universe is nothing like this as science would have it. So first of all, did man appear early in the universe? Not at all. So according to the most reliable scientific estimation, the universe is on the order of 15 billion years. The Earth is on the order of like a 5 billion year span. And human beings, depending on how you define us, but if it's the current form of Homo sapiens, generous estimates place us at about 100,000 to maybe 500,000 years max on the planet Earth. So that means that we actually occupy a very tiny piece of the timeline of the overall universe's history. If you like to have a metaphor in terms of space, then imagine a 24-mile line, almost the length of a full regulation marathon, which is 26.2 miles. In a 24-mile line, relative to the appearance of mankind in the universe, we would have appeared only in the last 2 inches of that 24 miles. So the timeline actually is largely devoid of mankind, except for the very late arrival that we've had in the universe. Or if you have a temporal metaphor, if we could condense the history of the universe down to 1 year on planet Earth, then mankind would appear in the last 2 seconds of the year, right as people are about to say Happy New Year or whatever. So it would at least seem, if you follow the scientific account, that this is not the case, that we didn't appear early in the universe. Nor, according to the second point now, nor did we appear early, or I should say not long after the other animals. Even on the planet Earth, we're late to arrive. So for many millions of years at the early point of the Earth, it was just primordial bacterial microbial life forms, and it took much longer for them to evolve into vertebrate, reptilian, mammalian life, and eventually the bipedal, highly sophisticated Homo sapiens that we are today. So not only are we not early in the universe, but we're also not really early on the planet Earth, according to like scientific methods of carbon dating and fossil analysis. And then the third, the Earth being the center of the universe. I think I kind of covered that. It's well known that we're not the center even of the local solar system, and the universe is so vast in scale, it's almost a nonsense question to question where is the center of it, but we're not in any kind of prominent position, and we're very small, and that gets us to the fourth point. The universe is vastly larger than the planet Earth. Even going to the next available star, Alpha Centauri, that's over 4 light years away, which is a vast distance. I mean, a light year is the distance traveled by an object moving at the speed of light for a whole year, which would be 186,000 miles per second for a whole year. So you would have to travel at that speed for like a full presidential term just to reach the next star. But not only are there billions of stars, there are billions of galaxies which house these stars. And so the scale of the universe is just epic and almost unfathomable to the human mind. So no, we're not actually like a large part of the universe. If you compare us to the scope and scale of all things, we're infinitesimally small in this big grand universe. So how does that make sense with the idea that God created it all for us? That's what the author Everett is saying. So in the end, you know, he doesn't really have much more to say than this. He just wants to present us with some of the contradictions that lie between a traditional assumption of religion and then what at least it appears science has revealed in contemporary scientific research. What is one to do about these apparent conflicts? One way to go would be to reject the scientific accounts and say they must be mistaken. Another way would be to modify the understanding of the religious accounts, or to even reject those. But you know, each one of us is living our own individual life and making our own judgments. I'm just here to teach you these articles and try and give you a sense of the state of play and what all the intellectual options are, the menu of options that people do have in life. So this pretty much closes our discussion throughout the semester so far of philosophy of religion. We're all good now. We're done with that. So on Monday when we resume, we're going to jump into the new topic of ethics, and we're going to start reading John Stuart Mill and utilitarianism. There were 2 lectures that I had designated for John Stuart Mill, and then there was one lecture after him that was on a separate elaboration of his theory called extreme and restricted utilitarianism. I believe that to make space for the slight delays that we encountered this week and to make sure we don't fall behind, I'll just take one essay off of our schedule, and what I'm going to remove is the article by J.J.C. Smart called Extreme and Restricted Utilitarianism. That would have been the topic for discussion next Wednesday, but instead I'm going to have 2 meetings on Mill, Monday and Wednesday, to give us sufficient time and detail on him. And then we'll be fully caught up by next Friday, since then, with the omission of one article, that accounts for the lost date. Okay, so everybody that's here, let me know in the chat if you're still with me and that if everything is good. Very sorry for the bumps in the road this week. I promise you that we will do better in the future going forward. But I really appreciate you guys' help today. Now, I'm also going to send the office hour link. I didn't have a chance this morning to prepare it before the meeting, but I'm going to send it. If anyone wanted to, they of course could stop by between 11 and 12, but otherwise, I'll see you guys back on Monday then. Okay, and yeah, just as a reminder, if you're looking for that link, know that I haven't sent it yet, but I will send it after I'm done teaching at 10:50, kind of close to 11 a.m. hour, if you're looking for me. Okay, guys, well, have another great weekend. Thanks so much, and take it easy, and I'll see you on Monday. Bye-bye.